Hello friends, my name is Ryan. I'm going to tell you a story named The Haunted Highway, Ghostly Encounters After a Deadly Pileup, which is a very amazing story full of twists. So let's start. It was a cold December night, the kind where the air feels heavy, and the world seems to hold its breath. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver glow over the winding road known as Hollow Creek Highway. Locals whispered tales about this highway, claiming it was cursed, a place where tragedy struck again and again. But these were just stories, right? No one truly believed in them. Not until that night. On that fateful evening, a dense fog rolled in, blanketing the road in an almost impenetrable white. Drivers found themselves slowing down, their headlights barely piercing through the thick mist. Among them was a young woman named Amy. She was heading back to her hometown after a long week in the city. Amy wasn't one to believe in superstitions or ghost stories. But as she drove deeper into the fog, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. The highway was unusually quiet, save for the occasional hum of a distant engine. Amy gripped the steering wheel tightly, her eyes darting from side to side. Out of nowhere, she saw flashing lights ahead, a mix of red and blue cutting through the fog. Her heart sank as she approached the scene. It was a massive pileup, cars twisted and mangled like toys, their metal frames reflecting the haunting glow of the emergency lights. There were no police officers, no ambulances, and no people. Just silence. Amy pulled over to the side of the road, her breath hitching. She stepped out of her car, the icy air biting at her skin. "Hello? Is anyone there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. She walked closer to the wreckage, the crunch of broken glass beneath her boots echoing in the stillness. As she reached the first car, she peered inside. It was empty. The driver's seat was stained with blood, but there was no sign of the driver. Amy's stomach churned. She moved to the next car, and then the next. All of them were the same, blood, but no bodies. It was as if the drivers and passengers had vanished into thin air. A chill ran down her spine as she heard a faint whisper. Leave, the word was barely audible, but it was enough to send her heart racing. She spun around, but there was no one there. The fog seemed to thicken, swirling around her like a living thing. Amy stumbled back to her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. Just as she started the engine, something slammed against her window. She screamed, her eyes locking onto the face of a man, or what was left of him. His skin was pale and torn, his eyes hollow and lifeless. He mouthed something she couldn't understand before disappearing into the fog. Amy didn't wait to find out what it meant. She floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching as she sped away from the scene. But the highway didn't let her go that easily. The fog seemed to follow her, thickening with every mile. The radio crackled to life, a static-filled voice breaking through. "You can't escape," it said, sending shivers down her spine. The voice wasn't hers. It wasn't human. Amy's knuckles turned white as she gripped the steering wheel, her mind racing. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell her about Hollow Creek Highway, how it was the site of a tragic accident decades ago. A bus full of passengers had collided with a truck on a foggy night, killing everyone on board. It was said that their spirits still lingered, trapped in an endless loop of that fatal moment. The road stretched on endlessly, the fog growing denser. Amy's car began to sputter, the engine struggling as if it were being choked by the very air around it. She cursed under her breath, pulling over to the side. As she stepped out, the temperature seemed to drop even further. Her breath came out in visible puffs, each one hanging in the air longer than it should. She opened the hood, but she had no idea what she was looking for. Her hands trembled as she fiddled with the engine, her eyes darting nervously around. That's when she heard it, a low, guttural groan coming from behind her. She froze, every instinct screaming at her to run. Slowly, she turned around. Standing in the fog was a figure. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by the mist. Amy's voice caught in her throat as the figure began to move closer, its footsteps eerily silent. "What do you want?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. The figure stopped just a few feet away. Its face became clearer, and Ami's blood ran cold. It was the same man she had seen at the pile-up, his hollow eyes staring into her soul. He raised a hand, pointing toward the highway. "They're waiting," he said, his voice a chilling echo. Before she could respond, the fog swirled around him, and he vanished. Ami didn't wait to see if he would return. She got back into her car, praying it would start. To her relief, the engine roared to life. She sped down the highway, the fog gradually thinning. But her relief was short-lived. In her rearview mirror, she saw headlights. At first, she thought it was another car, but the lights were too bright, too close. They seemed to float above the ground, growing larger and larger until they filled the mirror entirely. Ami's heart pounded as the lights engulfed her car, blinding her. She screamed, slamming on the brakes. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer on the highway. She was in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with photographs of the pile-up, each one more gruesome than the last. In the center of the room was a table, and on it lay a single piece of paper. Trembling, Ami picked it up. It was a list of names. At the bottom of the list was hers. The room began to spin, the walls closing in. Voices filled the air, whispering her name over and over. "Ami! Ami! Ami!" She dropped the paper, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the face of the man from the highway, his hollow eyes staring into hers. Ami was found the next morning, her car parked neatly on the side of the highway. She was unresponsive, her eyes wide open and filled with terror. To this day, no one knows what truly happened to her. Some say she was the latest victim of the haunted highway, a warning to those who dare to travel it at night. And so, my friends, if you ever find yourself on Hollow Creek Highway on a foggy night, remember Ami's story. And if you see flashing lights ahead, turn around. Some roads are better left untraveled. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more spine-chilling tales, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Until next time, stay safe and beware of the fog.